essence. Wave. Yay. Fantastic.
My call to action speech will be on regulating GMO distribution and enhancing GMO research. Let us begin. GMOs are absolutely fantastic. They help solve world hunger, cure malnutrition, create glow-in-the-dark fish, and make food more accessible for everyone on the globe. And in all technicality, we've been genetically modifying organisms since the dawn of humanity. From making dogs look like this, to this, and then making bananas look like this, to this. These are all the traditional arguments that are based around justifying GMOs. And then the arguments against GMOs usually will rank under prejudice or ethical questioning. Now, I'm all for GMO foods. I think they're great. But what if they're subliminally degrading our health or the environment? Dun dun dun! But how would we know? Currently, there's little to no genuinely substantial research being conducted on the potential harmful effects of GMO foods. Perhaps that should change. And given the current political standing on how GMO foods are looked at internationally, that could not be conducted properly unless it is vocalized by someone like us. Now, in order to go through the actual possible GMO harmful effects, you have to first disprove all of the prejudice ones. So here's a clarification on how GMOs are created and discrediting some misconceptions that are already out there about them. The term GMO started becoming popular when scientists began radiating plants in hopes to find genetic traits that they could put into fresh crops and get a better benefit out of it. They would put plants through a radiation treatment, hoping that at random, beneficial mutations would emerge that they could then breed into other plants. Now, there are some people that think that radiation is actually in their food. It's not. It's not. The radiated plant would just be the origin of the trait that they're attempting to isolate. That plant is then crossbred with other plants for as many generations as it takes until that single trait becomes a dominant trait that goes through the entire crop. Meaning that by the second generation, all the radiated isotopes are absolutely gone. Another way we get GMOs is by selective breeding. This is the most primitive and often considered the most healthy version of GMO development, where you simply take two breeds of the same thing that you like and you make them make babies. Some people think that this has an ethical dilemma and makes it feel like we're playing God, as they pet their purebred dogs that were genetically mutated 50 or 60 generations in order to get the traits that they were looking for. Point is, as time progresses, species will mutate in some way, shape, or form, regardless of whether we desire to do it ourselves or not. Humans are in fact nothing what they looked like 1,000 years ago. Therefore, using this process to enhance a species to better benefit humanity is completely natural. The most recent technology in GMO food development is gene splicing. This is where scientists will take something called a gene gun, fill it up with biochemicals that'll alter the genetic code of the plant, and then stab it into the developmental cells in hopes that it'll grow that trait. And even newer technology that they're dabbling into is using a bacterium called CRISPR to literally just walk in and train the cells to be different. Well, it's a little more complicated than that, but you get the idea. Now, this is fantastic technology, but considering that it's working on a biochemically molecular level, we currently do not have the technology to create a 100% accurate genetic transformation without any side effects. Even with the plants that we work most closely with, there are millions of lines of genetic code that we still have absolutely no idea what it does. And also there are multiple times where the genetic code that we think is going to change actually alters something else as well, and we had absolutely no planning for this. Now, considering that this is still a pretty messy process, there are a lot of people that are still concerned that the genetic process will often create subliminally unnoticed genetic traits that could be aiding to kill us, or getting cross-pollinated into local foliage where the plants are grown and turning into the new traits for the local environments that could be destroying them. Now, as I scoured the internet for research, I discovered that there was little to no evidence disproving that this actually might be happening. And considering that this is the most scientifically based concern, this is the topic that GMO developers should be investigating their crops for before they distribute them. Now, let's investigate some ways that GMOs could be potentially harmful. Now, as I stated previously, genetic mutation is a very messy process and can create all sorts of unwanted genetic mutations that would not ever be seen until they were, A little bit too late. A pleasant example of this is glow-in-the-dark fish. Glow-in-the-dark fish were originally designed to try and expose potencies of different chemicals in water. When there was too much of a particular chemical compound in a body of water that the fish were in, the fish were designed to glow. This experiment was, well, an absolute failure because they could never actually learn how to turn on and off the glow-in-the-dark gene, and it just stayed on all the time. Now, this is an example of when it's an assistive property in a genetic mutation, but it is not always like that. Now, if anybody knows about killer bees were a closed crossbreeding experiment that accidentally got set loose. Contrary to popular belief, bees are supposed to be a nice, gentle, harmless species. And considering that killer bees are such jerks, natural selection absolutely loves that kind of stuff and let them become the dominant species of bees wherever they went. This makes it a miracle if you come across a bee that doesn't straight up want to run up and sting you like death in a tiny yellow and black jacket, which would be at some point or another a descendant of killer bees. Now, transferring this from happy fish and bugs to actual things that we would eat, there are a lot of crops today that have traits bred into them to resist pesticides, insecticides, and better take in fertilizer nutrition. Now let's look at that fertilizer nutrition real quick. One of the more popular fertilizers in America right now for industrial farming is nitrogen fertilizer. This stuff is incredibly toxic to humans. If you inhale a sniff of it, you are in a very bad day, and if you touch it on your skin, you're going to be scratching it for the next 3 weeks. Now, if you know anything about basic plant biology, budding plants will create giant pockets of nutritional value where they store everything that they've been digesting from the soil and the sun and the water for however long it's been since the last harvest season. These bulbs of nutrition are things like fruit, or the headstock of corn, or anything that's part of a plant that we eat. Now, creating plants with higher metabolisms, making it so that they can ingest the nutritional value of the fertilizer that they are grown in, is a great idea. However, there is a possibility that, considering that they are ingesting so much of these chemicals could actually literally bear fruit in their fruit that we would be eating, giving us poison. And that's bad. Responsible technology feels as though this is a problem that should be addressed. However, there is currently no substantial evidence to back whether or not this actually is a thing. Which is why we should find out. That's kind of important. Now, you know how I was talking about bees earlier? This brings us to our second topic, which would be cross-pollination. Scientists like to segregate different types of plants into what we call species. And then they like to take a bunch of species that have similar traits and then put them in things called genomes. Species in the same genome are often capable of breeding with species in the same genome, making it so that a flowering tree can, through many generations, cross-pollinate its traits to a flowering bush. I have a story of when this happened to me. When I was little, my parents had a garden. In this garden, they wanted to plant things such as bell peppers and squash and onions and jalapenos. Now, little did we know that jalapenos were related to at least 3 species in the garden, making it so that everything we harvested had a particular chance of being ridiculously spicy. Now, that was more of a pleasant surprise than an absolute crop devastation, but there are potentials where this could be a very fatal issue to the environment. Hippie science. Let's go and walk through a potential situation of how this might be a problem. Now, let's see, what sort of things are traditionally bred into most crops these days? We got the whole entire pesticide resistance, which is making it so that it's more resistant to chemicals. That doesn't sound like anything would be relevant. They got the enhanced metabolisms, plant metabolisms, which makes it so that they can better drink up the stuff in the fertilizer that they're fed, which wouldn't be harmful either because all of those are man-made chemicals and wouldn't be found in the normal world. Insect repellent. A common trait that is bred into modern crops today is an insect repellent. They would take a multitude of different genetic traits and combine them all together to be most resistant against potential bugs that would just destroy crops. This would include thicker eukaryote cell shells, putting the nutritional value in places that are harder for the bugs to be able to attain, and making parts of the plant that are more accessible to insects unpleasant for them to eat. Now, if GMOs are specifically designed to make it so that plants are more difficult for insects to consume, it might make it so that... Oh no. Bees! Bees! Why didn't I think of bees? There are so many issues! Bees, guys! Bees! Oh, what have we done? Bees, guys! Bees! Bee populations are becoming a pandemic and they're slowly decreasing in population. The dwindling bee population was noticed as early as 2005, but it's just now getting recognized as the media is actually talking about it. And flowering crops are perfectly capable of cross-pollination. And then corn. Corn is loosely related to a bunch of different types of weeds. Weeds with flowers on them. I knew this because I had to take allergy tests that hurt my back. Oh, corn! There are so many different types of species of crops that can be cross-pollinated into the foliage around them that makes it so that bees can't get nectar from them. And in order for a genetic trait to be dominant within a genome of different species, it takes about 50 years. How long have we started to industrialize GMO? 56 years ago! Bee! I have just made a conspiracy theory for the ages. But gee, I wouldn't know if this is actually valid. Why? Because nobody's researching about how GMOs affect their local foliage. Can these traits actually become harmful to bees and making it so that the plants around them that have flowers can't have nectar so easily injected from them? I don't know. Bees, guys, bees! And nobody has any interest in this issue because if the bees were dying because of GMOs, they'd lose business! And how do we prove these accusations true or false if they're ignored? If anybody knows the politics around GMOs, they have little to no governmental regulation. And possibly for the sake of the bees, they should be forced to investigate their own products for potential hazards to the environment. The bees, Dad! And of course, if GMO foods are filled with nitrogenous fertilizer, that would be bad too. They should probably make sure that that's a thing. But the bees, Dad! So, how do we accomplish this? GMO developers should have a regulation system that is a little bit more strict than they are having right now. There should be a checks and balances system that is very fair for all parties involved. Now, GMOs should not be hindered from feeding the world. If anybody remembers the revolutionary vitamin A rice that keeps kids from going blind, yeah, I don't think that we should stop that from happening either. But at the same time, the bees, Dad! So in order to keep GMO developers in check, it is usually most profitable to have the opposite party keep them under regulation. A progressive anti-GMO establishment that is recognized governmentally should create some sort of regulation process. These should be regulations that multiple different corporations and governments should agree upon governmentally and capitalistically. And whatever results that they discover of the GMOs that they are distributing, they should holistically publicize everything and be forced to do so by law. Only leaving discretion for, of course, trade secrets that they don't want dispersing throughout the populace so that they lose their trade. But, of course, got to make sure that those trade secrets get approval from said systems so that you don't create a legal loophole. And for the sake of business, it is not possible to check every single issue that could potentially occur within GMO food crops. And for side effects that are either completely benign or have minimalistic potential harm that is completely unnoticeable or irrelevant, these plants should still be distributed to make it so, we don't starve to death. But it would be nice to have a little warning label on both the seed and whatever is manufactured from that GMO saying this could be in it. Could. And then for the sake of people that like numbers, they should put a percentage potential of how much it could actually be what it says. Now, in order for GMO developers, regulators, and distributors to take notice of feeling like this is something that would actually be relevant to our modern day and age to enforce, one of two things must happen. One, a GMO plant creates a mass epidemic. like biochemical warfare. Now let's hope this doesn't happen and instead go for option 2. A non-biased, cordial argument would have to be expressed under a scientific basis, requesting the ability for GMO developers to actually test their plants for these potential side effects. From these reliable sources, GMO developers could have a possibility of having a good reason to investigate their own products. And there are a lot of times when regulations would have been fantastic for progressive technologies in the past. Potable water being piped through lead, Chernobyl's nuclear reactors, so many accounts of oceanic drilling spills, and so on. And so on and so on and so on and so on. These epidemics cost each industry hundreds of millions of dollars and cost hippies decades of therapy. And it is often difficult to harness new technologies from progressing as fast as they possibly can just because they're new and exciting, and nobody wants to stop them from doing their utmost potential to help humanity. But how about we learn from history rather than repeating it and ensure that GMO food technology becomes the most effective and inconsequential technology that we can make it. Thank you.